Excited to be here. Hopefully everybody's enjoying the conference. I think it's been a fantastic day so far. A lot of different, a lot of learnings across the board. I believe this is our last presentation before the bull riding. So hopefully everybody's getting excited. I don't want to be first, but we'll see how that goes. So for today, we're going to talk about DSOM, the DevSecOps Maturity Model, and talk a bit about maturity models themselves, and then get into the actual nuts and bolts of DSOM. And I think one of the things I wanted to jump out to is that listening to some of the talks is there's a lot of people say, hey, this is not a representation of my company. And quite frankly, this is a lot of the learnings that I've had in my time with the startup JIT, which I'll talk about. So I'm bringing a lot of my company learnings to this. It's not intended to be a sales pitch, but it just wanted to be clear on that we're bringing our learnings forward and love to share it with you guys. Open source, right? Open world. So just quick, you might look familiar. I'm the VP of Security Engineering and CISO at JIT. We're a startup. We're based out of Tel Aviv, Israel. And we just came out of stealth mode about 3 months ago. About 40 employees total. 38 of those are developers. And then I joined as, again, the VP of Security Engineering and CISO. And before I joined, I was with KPMG and Big Four Consulting for about 15 years. And I loved the consulting role. It was great. And I loved working with clients. I led within our cybersecurity practice, I led our cloud security compliance practice. And what that basically means is taking cloud service providers through some very rigorous compliance processes. If you guys have heard of FedRAMP, that's the big one. We were the leading team for FedRAMP compliance, but things like SOC 2 and ISO. But from a Big Four consulting perspective, I loved it, right? Because we'd show up at a Fortune 500 company, even startups. There'd be a team of like 5 of us, 10 of us, 20 of us. We'd show up, get the job done, move on to the next client. But one of the things I realized quickly was, is this lasting? Right? Are the processes that we're implementing, are they there long term? Right? That was a big challenge that we had. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned a lot about was we really stifled development velocity. Right? Because we brought in processes from the outside, pushed them down on, for lack of a better term, on developers. They didn't really stick, or if they did, a lot of the developers would move on. Right? So it was a bit of a challenge, but in terms of a lasting impression of our projects, we were successful. But the opportunity came up to join a startup. I'm like, hey, this is the time to do it, and I joined JIT. Just a couple other things about me. I like to be here. I'm a tech security and compliance advocate. I say that's a lot, but in terms of supporting developers, I really see this as the future of the security industry. Quite frankly, right? We look at it this way as developers owning security. And I love music. Love to be here in Austin. Awesome music town. There's so many good venues here. So many great musicians that have come through here throughout the years that are still here. Different types of music. So maybe catch a show or two on here. And love to travel and love the outdoors as well. So that's a bit about me. So let's talk about now DSOM from theory to enforcement. So we're going to do a little bit of a dive into security maturity models because we have to. Right? I think it's important for us to kind of set the baseline of what a maturity model is. Then we'll get into what DSOM actually is. Again, the DevSecOps Maturity Model. And then I think where we'll spend the bulk of our time is on operationalizing DSOM, because a lot of these models, again, great in theory, well written. They argue DSOM, it's getting there. But how do we actually implement it? So we're going to talk a bit about that and actually looking to automate using tools, and then our approach at JIT. And then, of course, any questions that anybody has at the end, would love to talk to that. All right, so what images come to mind when you think of security maturity models? I won't put anybody on the spot here, but I'll just go ahead and call out maybe not the most exciting, right? One of my favorites, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and hopefully not too much of a throwback. I actually think the English professor is people don't give him enough credit. Everyone thinks about Bueller, but the English professor was much more boring in my mind. But that's debatable. So yes, security maturity models may not seem very exciting, but hold on, there can be significant value, and we're going to talk about that today as well. Is what value these maturity models can help within your organization, within your role, help you to make an impact, right? Within whether you're a consultant, Whether you're a CISO, whether you're a developer, whatever your role is, can really make a difference across the board. And here's, I want to talk through some of those reasons. Translation to leadership. There was a talk I think that Joe just gave around social engineering, where we talk nerd to nerd, right? Which I love. We speak the same language, but of course we need to be able to translate to leadership. And these maturity models can really help with translating to leadership. What are the key pain points that we have? Could put in the language that's simple to understand, simple metrics, numbers, maturity levels. It's a great way to bring to your leadership to say, hey, we're at this maturity level 1. If you want us to get to 2 and 3, that's what we have to do, and here's the benefit. So it can be a really simple way to do that. Not simple, but a clear way to do that. And then we spend a lot of time to bringing consultants or doing internally a lot of analysis. Well, using maturity models, you can perform your analysis and see where you are from a maturity perspective, all in the same swoop, right? So I feel like the current state analysis and gap prioritizations, identifying your gaps and giving them priorities, and maturity models can really help with that, right? You put it into context that makes sense across the board. And then a couple other things, tools and automation. We've got to automate. If a process isn't automated, it's going to die most likely, right? And looking at maturity models, it can show us, hey, current state, we're doing okay, but it's a manual process. Here's what's going to take to automate this process. And then I think what's really important is resource needs, right? Hey, we can do this right now at this level, but if we really want to get better, we need these skill sets and we need these resources. So it can really help with that, again, that translation to leadership. And last, and definitely not least, is the risk exposure, of course. Probably the most important, where our risks are and the level of those risks. So hopefully that makes sense to kind of get you guys more in the theme of, hey, maturity models are helpful. Now let's talk a bit about the leading maturity models. And I'll share some of the NIST, the NIST cybersecurity framework. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. The NIST is quick to say it's not a maturity model. Well, it sure looks like one. It acts like one. In terms of looking at the different levels, NIST has a lot of great publications out there that we can utilize to see where we are from a maturity perspective. There, of course, is the tried and true, right? CMI. Well, what this really is levels, right? Level 1 through 5. But then there's some translation that we have to take of what does initial mean to what we're doing and how we're operating as an organization from a security perspective. So the levels are good, tough in translation for CMI. The Cloud Security Alliance, kind of similar. We do like how they've taken some of the levels and then translated them to specific areas around cloud security, but it's still more broad, right? It doesn't really get into how we operate as an organization. And then also call out, we do like OWASP SAMM. But again, it's a bit rigid. But you'll see that DSOMM actually borrows a lot from OWASP SAMM, so you certainly take a look at that. We love OWASP, obviously. Why we like DSOMM at JIT? A few reasons here, just to kind of cover this. We love the open source. At JIT, we're all in on open source. We think it's the future. We know it's the future. I think most of us can agree with that in this room. That's why we're here. We value open source tools, and we like the fact that that a maturity model has been built, and the community is really building it up versus something that's made to sell, for example. Developer owned, right? It's called the DevSecOps Maturity Model. This model it's really about how we operate, and we look at ourselves as an elite or high performing team from a velocity perspective, and certainly the DSOM is all about developers. Automation and tooling. There's integration from DSOM into different tools, and I think it also just helps us identify areas where we want to automate as well more clearly across our life cycle. And then that stakeholder value, I think it gets back to the translation to leadership, right, that I talked about, is that DSOM provides value to our developers, it provides value to team leads, and it provides value to our leadership as well. So we feel like it's a great way to provide value across stakeholders. All right, so just a bit more about DSOM. I think it's helpful just to kind of share some of this and give some credit. I actually had a great discussion with Timo Pagel, who built DSOM back in 2017, with the simple realization of, hey, I have no way to rate how my organization is operating from a DevSecOps perspective. And I talked to Timo about this talk. He gave some input too. And by the way, this being an open source project, he's certainly open to feedback, which we're sharing with him. Focused on security and DevOps strategies, focused on or based on needs for security prioritization for developers, the maturity levels, right? Software development. It's all up there. It's out in the open. There's the link for the OWASP page. And then I think we'll break this down a little bit, but the way that the DSOM is constructed, security dimensions and levels specific to software development, right? So we like that. And just the way that Timo kind of thought about this. And then there's some mapping to compliance frameworks. Timo started with ISO from a global perspective. Of course, I think that's going to ramp up big time too, right? Get more mapping, which will be great for mapping our maturity and also help us with compliance. All right, so here's just a quick view of what DSOM is. And I think already, I know it's hard to read the font on the outside, but the kind of the bullseye and the circular pattern the DSOM utilizes to measure maturity, right away. You can see the difference from the waterfall CMI to how we're looking at from DevSecOps perspective. And from the dimensions and subdimensions. So each one of these kind of layers in the bullseye, right? You've got build and deployment, culture and organization, implementation, information gathering, and then test and verification. So you've got all these dimensions. I mean, there's a lot there, right? There's a lot to cover. We do feel like it's all encompassing from this, these dimensions perspective. And then here's just a little bit more of a view, and Joseph showed this for the information gathering level in his talk earlier. But like for example, it's simple. Build and deployment is the dimension. Underneath you have subdimensions, right? Build and deployment, and then within each one of those you have the 4 maturity levels. Now, I think what's important is you don't want to artificially just choose 4 levels. So in some cases, Timo's collapsed into levels, and we agree with him. So like in some cases, you reach level 3, you've also reached level 4. Level 1 and 2 are combined. So there's some of those scenarios. So some cases you have 3 levels, but in the end, there's a maximum of 4 levels of maturity for each subdimension. All right, so that is the kind of an overview of DSOM. Hopefully it's all making sense and kind of why we like it and why it's a bit different from some of the other maturity models out there. For this talk now, we're going to talk specifically about the implementation and the test and verification dimensions, and then each one of these subdimensions. So there is a lot more. And not to say like the culture, organization, and information gathering, still very important, but we looked at some of these dimensions as kind of our first cut to look to improve our maturity across the board for security. All right, so let's get into the first one. And this is the meat of the talk here for implementation and application hardening. So for this first subdimension, if you look at this actually is borrowed from SAMM. So I talked about how DSOM is connected to SAMM. So you've got these 3 maturity levels, right? So the first maturity level considers security explicitly during the software requirements process. Second is increased granularity of security requirements derived from business logic and known risks. And then third is mandate security requirement process for all software projects and third-party dependencies. So you've got those maturity levels from an application hardening perspective. And the way it's broken down is now there's 2 streams. You've got software requirements and supplier security. Not surprisingly, supplier has been broken out as a separate work stream because of all the supply chain attacks. It's become such an attack vector that SAMM has broken that out, which DSOM borrows from. So we're going to spend a bit of time going through this first one just to kind of get you guys in the motion, then we'll go through the rest of them a bit faster. But all right, so hopefully this is making sense of like, here are the maturity levels, here's the words on the page that describe the maturity levels, but how do we actually operationalize this, right? Theory to enforcement. And the way that we looked at it is that this, got to keep this stuff simple, right? It can't be too complicated, even though there's a lot there in DSOM. We looked at this kind of bottom flow. Understand the risk, map that to security requirements, understand what tools, because we got to automate, we got to use tools wherever we can, understand what tools, and then that'll derive what specific tests that we're going to utilize. So looking at this maturity level 1, you got high-level application security objectives are mapped to functional requirements, and then for the supplier requirements, evaluate the supplier based on an organizational security requirements. All right, so how do we do it? Here's how we did it. I know there's a lot of words on the page, and there's going to be a lot of text, but I'm going to walk through it and happily share the slides too offline. But focusing on the software requirements, what's our objective from an application security perspective? Right, we want to prevent data or code within the application from being stolen or hijacked. Looking at the supplier requirements, the supply chain. What are the requirements? All software libraries are updated with vulnerabilities remediated, right? That's kind of how we look at the actual objectives or requirements. So in terms of kind of mapping the risks over to security requirements, we want to scan code for vulnerabilities. We want to scan code dependencies for vulnerabilities. We want to scan code for hard-coded secrets. Those are the three things that we want to do. So that maps to our requirements. Now let's get to tools, right? And I think this is the fun part. So again, we love open source security tools. There's some great ones out there. Here's a list of the ones that we use at JIT, right? From container scanning to code scanning, dependency check, infrastructure scanning. Zap is our favorite. We just hired Simon Bennett. If you guys know Simon, who leads the OWASP Zap project, he just joined JIT. All of these tools, we love the fact that they're open source. There's feedback. Again, we feel like this is the future. And all of these tools can be utilized to help you to enable security maturity within your organization aligned to DSOM. So let's go through, again, back to application hardening. Like I mentioned, so the security requirements, let's map those to tools. So for scan code for vulnerabilities, right? So for all of our Python code, we use Bandit. For our Go code, we use GoSec, and then for Java, JavaScript, and JSON, we use SemGrep. Then scanning code for dependencies. For all of our Python code, we use OWASP dependency check, which, by the way, it can scan other languages. We really like OWASP dependency check just for Python. We've done some evaluation just to share that. And then for all of our Go code, we use Nancy, and then for JavaScript type everything else, we use npm audit. There's no fancy graphic for npm audit. And then for our scan for our hard-coded secrets, we use GitLeaks because it supports multiple languages. And our buddy Zach Rice, if you guys know GitLeaks, he just made this a company not too long ago. So that hopefully this is helping to make sense, right? Now we've got our DSOM levels, our dimension, our subdimension, understanding the risks. That turns into security requirements, and now we have our tools mapped to those specific security requirements where we can test to see where we are. And it can help us to show where we are from an immaturity perspective. Now I'm going to kind of run through the next maturity levels a little bit faster. So for application hardening, again, you've got the two different areas, right? You've got for software requirements, structured security requirements are available and utilized by developer teams. Well, by using these tools, we feel like we're already there, right? Because these are security requirements that we run as part of our development processes or in runtime. So boom, we already got level 1 and level 2 by using these tools. From a supplier perspective, we're not quite there yet, right? Because this gets into some manual processes, supplier agreements. I mean, I know there's some tools out there. I'd love to hear if anybody has feedback of some tools for managing some of the supplier agreements. But typically, there's some back and forth that we have with our suppliers to get them to comply with our third-party security pieces. And then maturity level 3 says build a requirements framework for product teams to utilize. Well, by utilizing these tools, that gives us our requirements framework, right? And of course, we have to understand which tools make sense for us. But we feel like we're already maturity level 3 by utilizing these tools. And then again, from a supplier perspective, a bit more manual, right? Proper security coverage for external suppliers, providing clear objectives, a bit of a back and forth with suppliers. And then here's just a quick thing is what we do. This is a view within our JIT product where we enable all these code scans, right? So we turn on all these code scans through our security plan. It enables all the scans that I talked about, and then also the dependency checking. So we actually run those within our platform on our environment. All right, up next is development and source control. So for maturity level 1, and again, I'm going to go through a little bit faster now. Hopefully it's making sense of the process. So for maturity level 1, source control protection and versioning. So for this one, we simply want to have SCM implementation through GitHub. And I realize it's not as easy for everybody. We're a startup. We're all on AWS. Everything's using GitHub. I realize other companies have some legacy and on-prem. But for us, this is a bit more straightforward. SCM using GitHub is a straightforward way to have a requirement. And then maturity levels 2 and 3, again, these are collapsed. Enable code scan code scans from application hardening, subdomain, and enable branch protection. And then maturity level 4, this gets into a real shifting left all the way. So looking at like an IDE or like a local linter for our developers. Those are the four levels. So how do we do it? Again, we look at GitHub, right? All our code repos are in GitHub. That's how we get to maturity level 1. For maturity levels 2 and 3, we just talk through all the code scanning tools that we're utilizing, as well as that we're enabling branch protection as well, which our product does. So we feel like we've got those in a good spot. From maturity level 4 perspective and looking at the local development linting and style checks, we don't have anything in our product yet. We're working on it, but certainly there are many choices you have out there for linters that you can implement and work with your developers, making sure it's a tool they want to use, obviously. But that's something that we're looking to implement within our tool, but there are many options out there. All right, let's make sure there's anything else. Oh, yeah, just a little bit more about the branch protection, just enabling a minimum number of checks before merging to main. All right, this next one, even more text, but if you look at the subdimension here, infrastructure hardening. I mean, I wish that AWS and GCP and Azure, made it easier for us to harden our, our infrastructure. But the reality is, there's a lot of burden on our developer teams and our security teams to properly harden infrastructure. But if you look at this, like the different levels, right? So maturity level 1, it's pretty straightforward, right? Isolated networks for virtual environments, simple access control for systems, usage of edge encryption in transit and rest, and then usage of test production environments. So nothing too groundbreaking here, right? From an infrastructure hardening perspective. Level 2 gets into things like MFA, applications are running in virtualized environments, getting into your data backup, dependency checking, which I already talked about, right? Filter outgoing traffic, environments harden, usage of security accounts, encryption in transit for internal traffic, right? Not just the edge, and then usage of security by default for components, and then virtual environments are limited. So a lot for level 2. So I think Timo kind of made level 1 a little easier, level 2 is a little bit tougher. And then levels 3, level 4 get those kind of higher maturity levels. Immutable infrastructure, right? Your environment cannot be changed once it's been deployed. You're using infrastructure as code, role-based authentication and authorization. And then maturity level 4, limitation of system calls in a virtual environments, microservices from a microservice architecture perspective, and then using production environments that are closer to your development environments, and then of course the good old KS monkey. So let's look at this maturity level 1. So what are the requirements? Right, so isolated networks for virtual environments. We look at this, hey, enable VPCs. We're all in on serverless with AWS, so that's how we enable network segmentation. Simple access control for systems. So we federate systems with Google authentication, enable AWS accounts. Again, nothing too groundbreaking here. Usage of edge encryption in transit. So run kicks on Terraform, CloudFormation, and serverless, and that's for both encryption. So again, Kix is one of those open source tools. Sorry if you're not familiar with Kix. And then for usage of test and production environments, enable separate test and production environments with our cloud provider. So for this one, we utilize, again, AWS, our serverless environments is what we're utilizing for kind of our separation in virtual environments or classic VPCs. Simple access control for systems, again, AWS, in our Google Workspace, usage of edge encryption in transit and in rest. That's Kix, again, open source tool, and then usage of test and production environments, again, AWS. So just to give you an idea of how we've kind of gone through the maturity levels, and then we run Kix, again, within our tool to scan our full environment and our infrastructure. Again, level 2 is a bit more rigorous in terms of the number of requirements. I should say the number of maturity level statements. Looking at the requirements for MFA, right? Enable MFA on AWS and GitHub. Applications are running in virtualized environments. Enable VPCs and serverless functions. Data backup. Enable infrastructure database backup. So we use DynamoDB, so making sure we've got appropriate database backups running. Dependency checking, right? We already talked about this. Scanning code dependencies for vulnerabilities. Filter outgoing traffic, enable security groups with traffic filtering, and then make sure the environment is hardened. We run Kix on all our infrastructure as code. Usage of security account, let's disable the infrastructure root account, and then encryption in transit for internal traffic, and then the same thing for the security by default, or again, we're running kicks. And also for the virtual environment, kicks will help us there as well. So again, just kind of showing how we map to different tools and technology. For MFA, we have our own custom checks within JIT that we run. For AWS, we utilize AWS to make sure that we have the appropriate applications running in virtualized environments. So serverless is what we use. And for our data backups, again, OWASP dependency check. For our dependency checking, we talked about some of the other tools as well. Filter outgoing traffic, AWS, and then kicks for the rest of it. All right, so okay, we feel pretty good about getting into maturity level 2. 3 gets in a bit more, and this is just showing again within our tool, kind of what we run. Maturity level 3 and 4 for the requirements. So for immutable infrastructure, implement serverless functions like AWS Lambda that do not allow changes post-deployment. That's how we've done it. For infrastructure as code, so we manage and provision environment through code over tools wherever we can. And then for role-based authentication and authorization, design and deploy roles aligned with job functions. That's the 3rd level. And then for the 4th level, limitation of system calls in virtual environments. Again, our serverless functions deployed with least privilege, microservice architecture. This is where we use serverless architecture with step functions within AWS. And then production near environments are used by developers. Dev test environments are aligned with prods. Look to keep those environments as close as possible. And then usage of the good old-fashioned chaos monkey, right? Many chaos monkey applications out there, tools out there. So just quickly, again, AWS for the first 2 levels, and then we actually use another open source tool, AirIAM, for our role-based authentication and authorization. And it's actually, you could run that within our tool as well. And then for maturity level 4, we don't have anything within our tool, but again, I talked about the AWS configuration that we put in place to help us achieve these different levels, and then utilizing again a chaos monkey tool out there can be helpful. So that's infrastructure hardening. That was a lot, I realized. But hopefully that was helpful to get you guys an idea and kind of run through all the requirements for that. Up next, we're going to get into application testing. So again, some of the levels are collapsed. So jump right to maturity level 2, security unit test for important components. So let's run code scans in all our repos, and let's run infrastructure scans across production. Maturity level 3 is security integration test for important components, so penetration testing and web application scanning. And then maturity level 4 is high coverage of security-related module integration, like smoke testing. So this gets in like smoke testing for stability and functional testing integrated into our development processes. So how do we do it? So for the second, again, jumping right to level 2, our security unit tests for important components scan all our code repos and vulnerabilities. We just talked about that, right? So a lot of these different levels and maturity levels, there's overlap. So we're running all of those different code scans within our environment. And then security integration tests for important components. This icon is for Cobalt. We like Cobalt. They're not open source, but it's a pen testing community. And they've got a platform. It's much getting away from the traditional penetration testing approaches. So we utilize them for pen testing, and then using Selenium scripts for like some of our smoke tests, right? Well, we utilize that. So those are some examples of some of the tools and technology we've used for maturity level across the board for application testing. All right, so the next one is consolidation. And I really like this one because it's consolidation, it's bringing it all together. And if you look at this one, for maturity level 1, definition of quality gates, simple false positive treatment of defects of severity high or higher. So for the requirements for this, implement and enforce code, infrastructure pipeline, third-party scans for each pull request, right? Quality gates for each pull request. Implement branch protection to require approvals prior to each pull request merge. False positive, establish a process to review false positive, and then triage of all the highs. For maturity level 2 is simple visualization of defects. So let's get a dashboard and reporting of our vulnerabilities in our backlog and our vulnerabilities per PR, right? Just get some dashboarding going. And then for maturity level 3, this gets into integration of vulnerability issues into the development process, treatment of defects with moderate severity, so not just highs, but the moderates now, and then usage of a vulnerability management system. So for this one, automated scans, code scans are running and reporting and pull request comments, triage of all the moderates and the highs, and then tracking, managing, and reporting on vulnerabilities. And then maturity level 4, advanced visualization of defects, reproducible defect tickets, and treatment of all defects. So this is, you get into some detailed vulnerability metrics with some of your root causes, and then triage of everything, right? The lows, moderates, and highs. All right, so just a quick mapping. For the first 2 levels, actually the first 3 levels, we utilize within our tool. I talked about all the different open source tools that we're utilizing. So that's, in terms of code scanning, infrastructure scanning. So we utilize our own platform with all those open source tools that I talked about. And we're working on maturity level 4. Not quite there yet, but we're getting there. And then, one of the things too is important from a developer perspective is like within GitHub, something that we do within our platform is that we actually run within your GitHub comments. You'll see that we're running. We detected these code vulnerabilities. You can see it right there is running in a bot, and then you can actually interact and either accept or ignore or fix the vulnerabilities. And that's a really important piece that we feel like it's part of those quality gates, and then working directly with the developers, just again how we do it. Automated pull request comments. All right, so now I got a couple more sub-dimensions to walk through. And this gets into dynamic and static depth for applications for infrastructure. This will be a bit more straightforward because, again, we look at the tools, right? Which tools we're going to use. So maturity level 1 is just a simple scan. I think Timo made it kind of easy for us. But maturity level 2 is coverage of client-side dynamic components and usage of different roles. Level 3 is coverage of hidden endpoints, more input vectors, sequential operations and usage of multiple scanners. And then level 4 is coverage analysis, and then coverage of service-to-service communication. So for us, we looked at OWASP ZAP for really all of these areas, right? And running our dynamic scans, for our application. So running a web application scanner, we run it through our own platform, but of course OWASP ZAP's been around for quite a long time. It's going to help us cover all these different maturity levels, when it's implemented appropriately. And with authentication as well. Looking at the dynamic depth for infrastructure. So for this, I haven't talked about Prowler yet, so this is the first time introducing the open source Prowler tool. But again, Prowler is the tool that is going to utilize, we're going to utilize across the board. Prowler is great because it is dynamic infrastructure, running your infrastructure in runtime. And there's over 250 checks out there that Prowler provides. It's aligned with different leading practice compliance frameworks like ISO and GDPR. So, looking at the different levels, test for exposed services, test for network segmentation, test the configuration of cloud environments, and then for a weak password test, and then for our load test and for unused resources. Prowler is going to help us across the board for those. And then we also AirIM, I talked a bit about that, open source tool that was going to check for unused resources. So we like the fact that Prowler is going to help us across the board for our dynamic depth for infrastructure. And then static depth for applications. I think you're seeing some common things here, where all the code scans we ran right from Bandit, GoSec, and SemGrep, right, is going to help us across the board from a static depth for applications. So we scan code repos for all vulnerabilities, utilizing these tools, and it helps us with the first level, test of server-side components with known vulnerabilities. Local development security checks, static analysis for important server-side components, and on the maturity level 3 and maturity level 4. Down to 4 gets into more of those dependency checking, which is why we're showing Nancy and OWASP dependency check. So again, using tools across each one of these levels helps us to detect these vulnerabilities, and it helps us to get to these maturity levels, right out of the box. And then from a test and verification perspective, and looking at static depth for infrastructure, stored secrets, again, Git leaks is what we're utilizing. And then for kicks, again, is an infrastructure as code, and checking our cloud configuration, we utilize kicks for both maturity level 3, 2, 3, and 4. So without reading the slides, you can see right away we're utilizing these tools that we map to these different maturity levels, and then of course we run it within our platform. All right, so I'm going to kind of wrap up here. Hopefully this has been helpful to give you guys an idea of, it could be a bit daunting, right? Taking on these different security maturity models. So like, where do we start? And JIT is an open source. You're really valuing the open source community, open source tools, and feeling, knowing it's the future of InfoSec and cybersecurity. We're utilizing these open source tools wherever we can. It's a great way to get started and show how you can enable these different maturity levels for DSOM. So just a quick show of our tool, right? We have you can create a customized plan, so you can go through. You go to JIT.io. I encourage you just take a look. You can see right away. You can do your scan code for vulnerabilities, scan code dependencies, scan code for hard-coded secrets, infrastructure security as well, and also looking at your third-party apps. So you could run all these tools that I talked about independently. The challenge is that you have all these different results in these different tools. We'll aggregate those for you and consolidate those results for you. And I talked a bit about the PR comments, but this is just really important from a developer owning perspective. It's not just your security team that's running the scans and like telling the developers here where the problems are. You want your developers to see it real time so they can go through and understand where the vulnerabilities are. So having that dev native experience is really important. It's something that we provide as part of our platform. So encourage you to take a look. And then also, I think what's really important too is, I'm quick to say, hey, let's utilize tools to help us get to different, higher maturity levels, help us fast track our security program. At the same time, when you run all these different tools, you're going to get a ton of results, right? You're going to have to do a lot of false positive, triage. I mean, that is just the reality of running these security tools. And depending on how large your security team is and your organization is, it's like, wow, that's a lot to take on. It can be a lot to take on. So how do you prioritize? One of the things we've done is just per each pull request, right? Is you're getting ready to merge, a branch into main. Let's run these checks each time so you can prioritize. So it's something that we've done. I don't know if it's a new revolutionary concept, but it's important to see it. So something that we provide, you can take a look to see how many PRs are actually monitored, how many have open, have open security findings, maybe they're being blocked right now, and then how many have been fixed as well. As you can see that as well. But it really helps if your backlog is getting just too big. You can look per each pull request, and that can be a more efficient way to say, hey, can I let this new code release go out the door, or do I need to hold on a second? We need to fix these vulnerabilities. There's this major issue here that we need to take on. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the talk. I hope this is helpful for the group to really understand the different security maturity levels, different frameworks out there, how we're thinking about it at JIT as a startup. I realize everyone has a different technology stack, and everything's going to fit one for one. We are maybe we're lucky as a startup that we have everything within AWS and within GitHub is a starting point for a lot of these controls and implementations. But I think regardless, this could be helpful for everybody. So I encourage you to take a look at our site. We'd love for you guys to take a look at our site. I would love to hear your feedback too. Please reach out to me, Chris at jit.io. But again, really appreciate the opportunity to talk with everybody. Happily answer any questions that the group has around security maturity levels, about how we went about doing this at JIT. Any other questions out there? But thanks everybody for your time.